things, Marty.
They are.
Huh? You had more water to sample.
It's true.
Hope you didn't lose any boots or
No students were
kids
lost.
or
It's all good.
2018 was the wettest year on record.
wettest on. Do I need to hear about the boots? Because I don't know.
So as Jenny said, so I think no reflection on myself, but I was told this projector is a bit of a dim bulb. So as Jen said, we've been, thanks to support from the city of Cedar Rapids for a long time, like since 2000.
Thank you.
We have been in the Indian Creek watershed sampling for almost since the beginning, since about 2002. Let's see if I can make a check. So a map that I'm sure you're all quite familiar with, but we've been there since 2002. And we've had, we started out just sampling down here at Mount Vernon Road as kind of a snapshot of integrating the whole watershed. But since about 2007, we've had a number of sites up in the stream. And so just starting out, our northernmost sampling site right now is at Artesian Road, which is just on the south side of the landfill. And if you look at the map, what we're sampling at that point is entirely agricultural and rural parts of the watershed. And then moving downstream, we sample at Linn, so you've got a little bit of development going on in there, golf course. And then we sample on Dry Creek in Donnelly Park in Marion. And so Dry Creek is an interesting contributor to the overall watershed. So up here, we go through Alburnett, but coming all the way down to about here, it's primarily agricultural. And then we get into some kind of suburban development going through Robinson, Hiawatha. But also in this area, we've got significant contributions from springs. So in 2012, the drought year, my students were walking the stream up Dry Creek, and we could actually see springs come bubbling up out of the ground, which they thought was pretty cool. But that has a significant impact on the water quality then. We sample at Thomas Park, right below where Dry Creek comes into the main center of Indian Creek. And then we sample down here at Mount Vernon Road, which we refer to as ICWMA, Indian Creek South. So we've been at those sites now for quite a few years. And so it helps us get a better overall picture of what's going on in the watershed. And mostly we focus on nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, Ecoli, and sediments. We don't do anything too exotic with organics or anything like that. So let's talk about nitrate in 2018. Two things from this busy graph. By the way, I almost forgot, I made some copies. Although they're in black and white. Sorry. We don't have that kind of budget.
I can always post it on the website too.
It's about 13 copies, so I think but so a couple things here. So we have concentration on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and what you see is a pattern here that we see every year that starts out low in the spring, rises up as nitrogen is applied to fields and as rains begin to fall. On the bottom here, I've got daily precipitation in inches. So as was mentioned, it was a wet year. We had a number of 2-inch rain events. And as you can see, nitrate concentrations respond to those rain events in a big way. So early on, right after we started, and we sample weekly, but right after we started, we got a big rain event and we got a spike in nitrate concentrations. So we always see this pattern of spike in the spring, it stays up during June. In July and August, it falls back off again as things start to dry out. The other pattern that I think is interesting here is the spatial pattern. So just to pick a date that's sort of easy to see. Typically, the highest concentrations are high up in the watershed. Streams are pretty small at that point, but the concentrations are high. So here we are at Artesian, Linn Mar, Thomas Park, and at Indian Creek South, with Dry Creek being significantly lower. And again, the spring-fed part has a real influence there. So Dry Creek provides some dilution in the stream. But as you may be aware, the stream gets bigger as you move downstream. And actually, a former student took some flow numbers that we measured, took the concentrations on a given day, and the mass of nitrogen is staying about the same as you move down through the watershed. So it's kind of interesting. But you see that pattern almost, not always, but almost every day that we sample. So a little bit of context, here's also more data from last year. So the dark line here is Indian Creek, and the lighter lines are 7 other small watersheds upstream of Cedar Rapids that we've been measuring for a long time as well. And in this case, I'm just looking at the sampling point closest to the Cedar River, so kind of that integrated picture of the whole watershed. And what you see here is that Indian Creek is in the lower concentration of this set of watersheds. Generally, I would say is a good thing. It's not too surprising. We've known for a long time that if you plot the percentage of a watershed that's in row crops versus the average nitrate concentration for the summer, you get a pretty straight line. And these two watersheds up here, Lime and what we call North Clair, are up in the 80% range in terms of what percentage of the watershed's in row crop. Whereas down here at the bottom, Morgan and Otter are down in the 50s and 60s, and that's where Indian Creek is as well. So if you want to look for a positive factor in urbanization in the watershed, it's that will probably be a reduction in nitrate concentration over the years. Try to put positive. And if we want to just look at what Indian Creek's been doing over time, again, this is at Indian Creek South, looking from 2007 to the present. Of course, you all remember 2008. That was kind of a wet year. And 2012 was a drought year. So if you focus on the other years, you'll see that we're basically hanging out somewhere plus or minus, say, 6 milligrams per liter as an average concentration for the summer. We measure May to August. That's kind of where we're at. And if we look at this summer, we're at about 6.8. And if trends follow as they have in years past, July and August, we'll see lower values, and so we'll probably be coming back down here around 6. So I would be hesitant to try to fit a straight line through this data and make any pronouncements on are we getting better or getting worse. I would say we're staying about the same with respect to nitrate. Ecoli. Here, I didn't try to draw any lines between points because it would be an exercise in futility. If you look at any given date, you don't see that spatial pattern that you see with the nitrate. And my guess is this is reflective of the fact that Ecoli can come from a variety of sources. So we're talking about in the upper part of the watershed, you will see cattle in the stream. And so that's a potential source. If you go to Donnelly Park and look around, spend any time there, you'll see folks walking their dogs. Not everyone picks up after their dogs, unless you think that that's not a significant source. It is. It's been shown in other watersheds that that can be a source. You can have septic systems in the rural areas that are hooked up improperly, designed improperly, and you can have wildlife. We just mentioned geese, a potential source. And so spatial pattern, it really is none. And we've done a snapshot sampling where we went out and sampled like 30 places in the watershed on a given day to try to look for patterns. We don't see patterns. But what we do see, the red line here is the state standard for wadable for children's recreation. So not primary contact, but kids playing in the stream, and that standard is 235 colony forming units per 100 mils. We had 2 samples last summer that were less than that. We had 53 samples that were higher, including some up here well over 10,000. So this continues to be an issue. It's not an easy issue to, because there's no one silver bullet solution. Yeah, 2 out of 55. And here's a little bonus. That because some of the work took place in the Indian Creek watershed, I just wanted to share with you. Rebecca Cowton just successfully defended her PhD thesis about a month ago, a couple of weeks ago, and it focused on chloride, basically road salt, and what impacts it might have in streams. And one of the sampling sites, this is a very interesting site. So it's a little stream, so at Lyndale Mall, have a lot of parking lots. That goes into a storm sewer that goes under the street. It goes by Emils. Oh, you're all familiar with that. I've been told that during a large rainfall event, if you stand near the storm drain in the Emils parking lot, there's a suction. There's a lot of water that flows through that. And then if you go behind there, the terrain was really interesting. There was, I think, a railroad track there, and then it drops off. And at the bottom of the drop-off, there's this very cool tunnel. And the water comes out of that, and there's a short stretch that then goes to Lyndale. Okay. So it's a great site to look at what happens drainage from a commercial, primarily commercial area. And so one of my students went out on a regular basis, trying to represent where it is a little bit more effectively. So Lyndale's up here, drainage comes out, and then it shoots out here and hits Indian Creek right around there. So we did some sampling on a weekly basis, and then Rebecca also installed some ISCO samplers that we triggered based on when there was a snowfall, snow melt event. So what we wanted to see is what happens when the snow melts after the road's been salted. And, you know, in a shocking development, in the fall it doesn't snow very much. Breakthrough. But in January of 2018 it did snow. And we collected one sample that came in at about 5,500 milligrams per liter of chloride. And that's somewhere between 25 and 30% of what seawater would contain. So that's what, as a scientist, I would call crazy salty. And if you tasted it, it would taste salty. It's an event sample, so it spiked and it came back down. But we took some other samples that were up in the 2,000 and 3,000 milligrams per liter, or should I say 2 grams per liter. So, and even for this tiny little stream, these X's, where we were just going in and taking weekly samples, were up at about 178 milligrams per liter. If we look at Thomas Park, May to August, a normal background level is around 34. So I just think this is an issue that you may want to have on your radar. Pulses that high may have, I'm not may have an acute effect on the flora and fauna that live in the stream. And so I think it ought to be on the radar. It may also be corrosive to some kinds of infrastructure. So,
Marty, I don't want to hijack
Yeah.
your presentation, but Kara and Mike, all of those residents, all of that is Lindale and Best Buy and Home Depot and Collins Road Square. Most of the residents that are in Marion, all that is in Cedar Rapids.
right.
And the creek runs through a bunch of residential, just single-family homes.
It's a great little neighborhood.
Yeah,
It's really,
Hidden away.
it's just hidden away. I didn't know it was
but
there.
it's in Marion.
Yes.
So I get phone calls from the people saying, hey, this creek in my yard has got a foamy white substance in it. And I'm like, yeah, it probably does. So they want me to test the water and all that other stuff. And I think we've got to figure something out with this because most of those residents don't know that everything from Lindale and Best Buy and Collins Road Square dumps through their yard. They just think, oh, this is a beautiful little neighborhood. Oh, look, it's a creek. Oh, no, it's actually something that has this giant sucking sound from this intake in the parking lot of Stream of Us. I know it's kind of a political nightmare to think about. Oh, we've got to create some kind of something so that the private property, commercial property owners need to add some things or make some major changes to control stormwater. But this is, we got to figure out what we're doing there.
Property owners, I live down there and we don't contribute much to that creek.
Right. It's all, everything that comes through there is from the commercial development
And it
upstream.
comes through there in a hurry when you get a major rain.
Yeah, and out of sight is out of mind until it's not out of sight.
Yeah.
And there's people that have driveways that are over the creek and very steep cul-de-sacs that are off of there that have significant runoff.
Yeah.
But I'm getting those phone calls because it's in Marion.
Basically one street, the other two streets I think are Cedar Rapids, aren't they?
The entire development,
Pretty much.
yeah, the whole thing is Marion.
I know, well, garbage pickup and that's Cedar
Oh, yeah.
Rapids, but
Yeah.
That was developed way back in the sixties and seventies.
that built,
Any silting, you know,
yeah,
any
built a
kind
house in
of
there in '76.
basins installed up there at all. They've been revamped.
It is a great neighborhood. It's tucked
Yeah.
away, you don't know it's there.
Yeah,
unless you're
exactly. It's
there.
really
Yeah.
tucked away. I mean, you get one block off of the main drag there and you're in this tree line. Very nice neighborhood.
Steve, are you talking about the neighborhood that's east of Highway 100 and north of the creek?
East of-
You know where the A-frame is on First
It's
Avenue?
east
It's
of,
behind,
It's behind
the
that.
Outback and.
Called Glen
what's now
Coe,
McGrath.
Glen Brook.
behind
There
Home
we
Depot.
go. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically behind Home Depot.
South
Yeah.
of Home
Back
Depot.
in there.
So,
Yeah, south of it. Been there for years.
Yeah.
do you have a question?
I did, so I was just curious, and I was just looking this up. The water quality standard for chloride is complicated.
Right.
Because there's a kind of an equation that you have to work through. And I was just curious if Rebecca or anybody had looked at that and, I mean, obviously some of these are clearly elevated, but as far as some of the lower level samples, do you have a sense of how close those are?
I looked at it. I think the equation that the state uses, I think includes alkalinity,
It does.
and we did not measure alkalinity.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I think she plugged in some surrogate numbers to try and get an idea of their
Okay.
standard. And I'm certain she would be happy to talk with you.
Does Rebecca have a summary yet?
She has a thesis.
Is she gonna put a one-page summary?
She should have a one-page summary as the introduction, or when she had to defend it, she has to put together a one-page summary.
Yeah. We should just get together with Rebecca and chat. I don't want to steal her thunder.
PhD through which university?
University of Iowa,
Okay.
Geography and Sustainability Studies. So then, just a quick mention here, and this is using data from the Flood Center, but this is just stage, so the level of the water of Indian Creek at Mount Vernon Road, that's the blue, and at County Home Road, it's the red. And whole lot of data points here. But what is interesting to me is just looking at a few places where you see a rise in water level at Mount Vernon Road, and you don't see it at County Home Road. And assuming, and I know sometimes rainstorms really are that isolated and compact, but most of the time, they're probably gonna hit both. But think about what's between County Home Road and Mount Vernon Road, and increasingly, there's a lot of concrete, a lot of asphalt, there's a lot of roofs. And we know that we're expanding out that way, there's gonna be more. So as that continues to happen, you're gonna see water levels that are flashier, that go up and down more quickly, simply because if it falls on dirt, it can soak in. If it falls on concrete, it's gonna run off quickly. So I think, I think it's a subtle effect, but I just want to bring that up. So,
I took video this year because where we are, we restored that oxbow in there, and we're kind of in the corner south of the bridge across from Thomas Park. We saw the highest water level we've ever seen, and it came faster than it came in the 2008 timeframe. I took video of it because I'm trying to understand it, and so we saw it, and we were trying to figure out what was going on because I didn't study the rainfall. We knew we got a lot of rain, but it came up and it stayed up.
well, and I'm sure Kara's very familiar with, we used to do design for 1.25 inch rain as being the big rain. And as you can see, we're getting 2-inch rains multiple times per summer in a day. And so our infrastructure has to respond to that, and the streams will do what they do.
We call it the big breakout because we had about 75 bluegills that were in our oxbow that were happy to leave. Because they
So,
came and stayed,
just-
there was a lot of pressure.
To sum up, so that Jen doesn't give me any more dirty looks, I think nitrate values that we see are fairly typical for an Iowa stream that's influenced by agriculture to the extent that Indian Creek is. E. coli counts are high. We exceed our standard frequently. Those pulses, we sample once a week. The state, when they do their big river samples, sample once a month. When you sample like that, you're missing those episodes where a pulse comes through. And I think with chloride, it's kind of an interesting question to think about what effects that has. And more concrete flashiness. So what are we doing? We've been working with Emory to start sampling some places where he's confident that we're going to be putting in some BMPs next year, and so we're trying to get some background measurements this year so we can do some assessment as to how effectively these things are working. And I thought you might enjoy knowing, we found 1979, I don't think it's that long ago, but turns out that's 40 years ago. A student wrote a thesis at Coe looking at the species distribution and numbers of fish in Indian Creek, and I have a student who's going to try to reproduce that study so we can do a comparison looking at what 40 years of development, what impact that's had on fish population. So that's it.
Hey, Marty, put
Yes.
that student in touch with David Kessler,
Oh, that's a very good idea.
because he randomly emails me with, I was
Yeah.
out for a walk and look what I found today.
That's a very good idea.
So, yeah, he
Because
has a lot of background knowledge.
I'm a chemist and, sorry, I don't eat fish.
Oh, they're delicious.
Me too,
Yeah.
Marty.
Yes.
Marty, did you all do anything with phosphates?
Yes.
Did I miss that?
We do measure dissolved reactive phosphorus. It's there, it's relatively low levels, there's no discernible patterns that we see spatially. When you get a big rain and you wash a lot of sediment in, the dissolved phosphorus goes up. That's kind of where it's at.
Okay, isn't that an algae encourager?
Yeah, and I don't know, I've read both ways. I mean, we have so much nitrogen. Phosphorus may be limiting, but more likely, I think it's just, there's plenty of both for our algae to take off in.
Okay. Are CAFOs a factor in Indian Creek?
Not
I'm not
really.
sure there are
I mean,
any. Are there any in our watershed? Up near Center Point there are, but that's not in this watershed.
yeah.
I don't know.
No, I.
Surprisingly.